Here we are with Ken Biberaj of both Sayvilles and Coffee with Ken. Ken, you wear many hats. How should we think about you here on today's episode?
Well, I have so much hair, so I need so many hats just to cover it up. Well, yeah, Zach. First of all, it's so great to see you. I'm so proud of you and so excited for what you've created. And yeah, to your point, I have a day job. I work in commercial real estate at Savills. We do, site selection for advanced manufacturing. It's a global firm. We love helping clients think about where they should be, figuring out where in the country to set up manufacturing. And I also host Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series. I'm based here in the Washington D.C. area, and for me, the Coffee with Ken series during the pandemic and having conversation with elected officials, policymakers, and really kind of understanding what was happening in DC has kind of actually taken my career in real estate on a totally different path. And that path has been on this site selection adventure, helping a new wave of advanced manufacturing companies, both in the energy and defense sectors, figure out where they should set up factories in America and helping compete states for those projects and figure out what the real estate solution is for them.
And I feel like this is a new thing, right? Washington having its thumb on the scale of where things get cited, but we're in an era where everything from nuclear to different manufacturing, it all has a federal agenda and nexus with it. And I think you've really been on the front end of that. What does that look like day to day sitting in Washington for you?
Yeah, it's a really remarkable time. If you buy into the fact that we have outsourced manufacturing in the United States for the better half of 3 or 4 decades, and now we're in a moment where, in Trump won as a, result of Project Warp Speed, and then President Biden coming in with the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, infrastructure bill, and then President Trump returning and demanding that companies reshore and bring back factories. And now all of this innovation from the West Coast. We no longer have the best innovators in America building social media apps so we can just get food. They're building battery technology, rare earth mineral technology, drones, autonomous technology. The best and brightest in our country are now physically building things. And as a result of that, we have to figure out where in the country to put those projects. So for me personally, this is the first time that Washington has mattered from a real estate perspective because so much of that innovation requires the buying power and support of the federal government. So what I mean by that is you're seeing this through divisions of the federal government like the Loan Program Office, which is now Energy Dominance, the Office of Strategic Capital, the Export Import Bank. And these entities are now either lending money, giving grants, or contracts. So now you have these young companies coming to DC, getting support from the federal government, and then looking to site these projects around the country. So for us, what we look to do is help these innovators, but we look to match a federal strategy with a state and local strategy. So as they're crisscrossing the country, figuring out where to set up factories, what is their federal strategy? And how does that align with their state and local? And how do we just help them move fast, but in an efficient way?
And having come from a background in strategic communications, public affairs, government relations, your job today sounds a little bit like what my job was. So when something like the national security strategy
Yeah.
comes out, like I assume, are you combing through that? Are you thinking about, real estate in the context of these things?
Yeah, listen, I don't know how many real estate brokers comb through the president's national security strategy, but for me personally, I have a master's in public policy, a law degree. I nerd out on these things. I find it fascinating. I'm working my way through the latest industrial policy of the United States. It is a page turner, and I mean that in an
Yeah,
actually
truly.
sincere way, because we have domestic policy, we have foreign policy, but inherently at the nexus of it is actually industrial policy, and we have just ignored it for the last several decades because we are not thinking about our supply chain. We have not been thinking domestically about our national security. And these are things that we need to prioritize. And by helping these companies figure out where to put these projects, it is now something that is of the largest order of magnitude for our country. So in November, the actual national security strategy of the United States on page 13 called for reindustrialization of the United States. And what that means is actually prioritizing speed to market and building more technologies here. Just last week, the Secretary of Defense flew to Los Angeles, to El Segundo, and to Torrance and Hawthorne, and visited some of the newest wave of defense companies in America. These aren't the big primes, not the Lockheeds or Raytheons. These are the newest ones, the Divergents of the world and the Hadrians and Andurils. So this new wave of technology is getting the attention of Washington because they are raising venture capital funds and investing those dollars to build technologies ahead of getting the big contracts. So they're putting skin in the game to create technologies they think government and the warfighter will need And then that's how government's responding and then buying those products. So this innovation is being met by demand.
Simple as that. And
Yeah.
look, I think you're not only wearing the hat of someone with a public policy degree, someone who loves it and nerds out on it, someone who's on the front lines of real estate, but you've actually have a vision of things that can be done that go beyond what's already in motion. And you wrote about it in a recent Commercial Observer op-ed. We cannot reindustrialize without real estate. Tell us a little bit about the thinking and some of the ideas that you shared in that piece.
Well, the things are just moving so fast in this country, right? These innovators are just creating things. And look, their mantra is always move fast and break things, right? But sometimes you have to go slow so that you can go fast. And real estate is not something that inherently goes fast. Government does not inherently go fast. And this is a whole of society approach that will enable us to collectively to go quick to meet the speed of a China or a different adversary. So if you have a national strategy on industrial policy, but we don't have state and locally matched priorities or strategies, there is a big disconnect. So if the federal government says we're going to give billions of dollars to companies to build technologies that are important, do we have the workforce pipeline locally in place to match that? Have states and localities created their own strategic initiatives with zoning and land use and power studies and even investments in site readiness to have property ready for companies to deploy and build these properties? They don't. I was at a conference recently and we were talking about this, and I asked, 90 different local regional economic development leaders, have you created your own state, you know, national security strategy, to meet the national security strategy? And, that nobody had, obviously. But I mean that in sincerity, right? Like every state and locality should be responding to this national reindustrialization, and they should be proactively saying, we're going to take this property or these locations in our community, and we're going to get them ready for new manufacturing and for new industrial policy. So many of them are rushing to capture the dollars of data centers, right? So data centers are willing to pay the big dollars. So a lot of the power allocation, a lot of the best sites are unfortunately just getting deployed in that direction. That is going to slow us down even more because that's going to create reactions in communities around NIMBYism. It's going to create challenges around pipelines for more power. It's going to delay us from getting sites ready. So all of this without some proper planning, which usually happens at kind of the state level or even a regional level, it's just going to delay us further. So I just worry about the trickle down effects of not fully educating folks at the local level about some of these national challenges.
And it feels like state governments in particular are becoming more in the real estate business just from the perspective of site readiness. I think one of the big trends of the last several years has been different site readiness funds, states doing the legwork of, getting a site ready to interconnect or to have certain utilities and infrastructure. I mean, is this just something that's already in motion and needs to get refocused? Is it a capacity that doesn't exist? What's your experience in terms of seeing where states are positioned to actually be helpful here versus, as you said, being reactive to data centers and so on?
It's a multifaceted approach, right? So a couple of examples. The mayor of the city of Cleveland, Justin Bibb, created a nonprofit called the Site Readiness Fund. That entity acquired over 200 acres of industrial real estate. They have now been doing the hard work internally in that community to figure out what those assets could be best used for, what industries they should be targeting. That kind of proactive approach to control their destiny is what multiple communities around the country should be doing. You recently had Governor Youngkin on your show. Albemarle County acquired a piece of property in their community in Virginia. The largest acquisition that county had ever made, I think, was like $700,000 for a piece of land recently. They spent $60 million, if I'm not mistaken, to acquire a 90-acre parcel near a government site. That site just went to AstraZeneca, and that return on investment for that community is going to be astronomical. Governor Youngkin used his fund to create, I think it was like a $9 or $10 million investment in site readiness. It is these kind of strategic bets by localities matched by the state that is going to help create a return on investment. Now, every project is not for every community, and every community is not for every project. So when I, as a site selector, go to a community and ask, well, what kind of project, is good for your community? If they say everything, just bring us what you got, that to me means that you haven't done the hard work, you're not thinking critically, and you're kind of being a little lazy. We need communities who are thinking hard and doing the research about what the educational pipeline in their community is, what the background of their talent is, what physical resources they have, what the power pipeline is, what the costs are to get sites ready. what the supply chain abilities are. These are the things we need to figure out. If you have airports in your community, what are the opportunities there? Do you have an air mobility plan in place around drone technology, around eVTOLs? These are real things that are happening fast. If your airport director doesn't know what eVTOLs are, these are things that you need to catch up on. If you have a port, we've found this as a staggering challenge. If you have port leaders who are just kind of legacy port leaders who don't care about shipbuilding or new technologies, we don't have limitless ports in this country. And China's building more, ships, per annum. I think it's like 1,200 compared to, the fraction that we make. So we need to figure out that port infrastructure. So these are things that certain communities have the ability to do that, others don't.
And if you're a community right now, a state, let's call it, and you're looking at this dynamic world that's happening around it, is it, yeah, how do you speed up? I mean, part of it feels like storytelling. Part of it feels like alignment of stakeholders, just getting your house in order and kind of packaging the right narrative and giving the right focus to where it needs to be. But how much of it is that, which feels a little bit more nimble and kind of strategic, versus the hard work of things like site readiness and really getting motion? Like, if you're a state right now, where should you start, and how long
Sure.
will you think it will take to really get in shape to be on your radar for a big opportunity?
Yeah. Two-part answer there, right? So we talked a little bit before we started this conversation. A lot of these companies we work for, they don't have real estate departments, they don't have government affairs departments, right? So we step in and we try to help supplement that and get them organized so that when they come to the state with a project, we have, some informed metrics for the state to respond to. We know what the capital investment will be, what the talent requirement will be, what the project scope will be. Same goes for the states. They need to pause and they're always reactive, unfortunately, because they're getting so much inbound, right? So if 100% of your time is just reactive, you're never going to have the ability to strategically plan. So 20% of your time needs to be kind of assessing all the real estate you have, figuring it out. If it takes 36 months to get substation parts, you're never going to get ahead of that if you don't make some strategic kind of decisions around what ecosystem you want to create. So we are now increasingly getting calls as site selectors to spend time on ecosystem advisory. So some of these states and localities are now proactively reaching out to us saying, hey, you know what these tenant wants? Can you help us figure out what in our community we could be doing? And that was a business line that we weren't really expecting to spend time on. Now, we can't do it for everybody, but there are groups out there that could help advise your community in a kind of master plan sense, less as architects, but more as business advisors to help you think through what are the kind of soft, resources that your community has that could be leveraged to help attract some of this talent and some of these companies. So you got to put in the work. You got to kind of really drill down.
And do you feel in a lot of instances, I know that, the game of economic development is not new. We're in a mode where maybe the treadmill has sped up. Is it that, these are, I don't know, antiquated mindsets, antiquated systems? What needs to change within, a state agency that's trying to attract business? Or what are you seeing change in successful instances? Like, what's the thing that's shifting?
Yeah, I think the localities that are getting out of their own communities, that are going to the El Segundos, that are going to MIT, that are coming to DC, that are actually traveling and coming out of their comfort zone. And now I'm in DC. I'm getting calls from people who are coming to DC to visit saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in town and I'm visiting from Space Florida or I'm visiting from Houston. Do you have a few minutes for a coffee?" And I'll meet them here. And you know what? That's easy for me. And it just shows that they're being intentional about coming to DC to kind of better understand what the dynamics at play are here. And when I go to a state and I mention the Office of Strategic Capital or reference a book on industrial policy and they don't know about it, there's a lot of homework, right? There's a huge learning curve and things are moving so fast. So I can't, put fault on states for keeping up because it's hard enough for me to keep up and I'm here and this is what I'm doing for a living. But understanding who the newest company in LA is, understanding what's happening in DC, these are important things. That's part of what you as a economic development leader, that's a new part of your job that maybe wasn't the case, 2 years ago. Because some of these companies that are now getting $1 billion from the federal government didn't even exist 3 years ago. So it's not fair, but there is a learning curve of things happening at the federal level and now happening on the West Coast that you just didn't know about that you have to keep up with.
It makes a lot of sense and resonates, having just, we were talking about coming back from CES, where
Yeah.
over half a dozen different states had a presence there. And Governor Michael Dunleavy of Alaska was there, meet with companies, learn about new companies. And, he was very cognizant that he's not going to accomplish it, 5.5 hours away up in Juneau.
Oh,
He had to
yeah.
come down to Las Vegas and really walk the floor of the show. So
Yeah.
that piece of travel really resonates.
Totally. And that's a perfect example, right? Like, so the governor of Alaska, I saw him at Select USA. And he described Alaska as a resource state, something that I had never really, heard someone say before. And it was kind of in this narrative around critical minerals, right? Like one of the, most active topics these days is just like this pipeline of access to critical minerals from like a national security perspective. We don't have magnets in this country. We don't have, graphite in this country, right? So at lithium, like China dominates the critical mineral access points, right? So for him to kind of point out that Alaska, a state of 700,000 people, that's the largest state in America, him even framing his state that way creates a narrative around, okay, what's the opportunity that he may be thinking for his state for 10, 20 years down the road? For, Tulsa wanting to be known for drone technology. I know you've been in Utah recently. They want to be known for aerospace. If Louisiana wants to be known for shipbuilding, right? Like some of these states are softly developing their own kind of narrative and an ecosystem that they want to kind of attract more of that business for. So again, some states don't have that ability, but they need to figure out what they can have as their narrative.
And one of the things we were just talking about is, as you mentioned, the unicorn mindset of one of these modern industrial companies where they got to where they are really on not on a whim, but as just being more entrepreneurial than anything else, and doing it without the legacy infrastructure of a real estate department. So what does that mean in terms of how you interface with the client? Does it as we're talking about it, it feels like it puts more onus on states to do upfront work just to have their homework done, put you in a position to help present that option at the table. But what is it about, the mindset of, call it the startup, modern industrial startup unicorn, that would help pull them into a particular state versus another? What does that need to be thought about on the state side as they're trying to engage with this different type of client?
Yeah, for them, I mean, uh, when we're meeting a company at the beginning, for us, it's kind of just explaining the process. Traditionally, you could hire a Deloitte to do the tax modeling, a site selector from the Midwest to tell you where to build the factory because of labor analytics, and then a real estate company like a Savills or a CB or a Cushman to help you with the transaction. We are doing all three of those, and because we're in DC, we're trying to overlay a political lens to it. So what I try to offer is an end-to-end offering for my clients that will help them match their need for speed. And then we kind of explain the geographic map is just so wide open. So if energy companies in the past had to be in Arizona for solar or in Louisiana for gas and Texas for oil, Redwood Materials is building batteries in Nevada and South Carolina. People are building aerospace in Ohio and Utah. The map's open. So number one, if the map's open, you need help narrowing it and why. Because you have investors, you probably have, future aspirations to IPO or do something else. So you're going to want to have that due diligence. So we help you kind of put a methodology around how are you narrowing the map and why. Okay, so then we narrow down the map of what states to target. Then we run a comprehensive RFP process against those states to compete them for economic incentives. And then when you start explaining to the company that there are, incentives out there for these, from the states to help fast track speed to market, that's where it starts to resonate because we don't know how to build planes. We don't know how to build drones, but we know how to help you do it faster and de-risk that process. And that's where it starts to resonate. And the last aspect of what we try to do as a differentiator is as we're narrowing down the sites per state, Zach, we'll know what members of Congress per site per state. And that's where we team up with the government relations team and the lobbyists. This that kind of moment of like, okay, well now let's align your government affairs strategy with your broader strategy. And who are our advocates? Who are your advocates in Washington? And help really tie that all together. And at the end of the day, this is just how it's always been done. What's the ethos of the community, the quality of life? Where are you going to raise your kids? Where are you going to hire the right folks? Where are you going to put your flag? If you're coming from Austin or, from Boulder or from Seattle or from California, where realistically do you think you're going to be able to go? And so for an Andoril with a Trey Stevens as a executive chairman kind of coming back home to Ohio, they evaluated a lot of other places, but you know what? Kind of makes sense, right? There's a lot there in that Dayton area. They have a strong pedigree of that kind of aerospace industry, so it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, Palmer Luckey had a great explanation of their process and the fact that he's from Ohio. At least he said it wasn't the final decision, but at least gave it a
Sure.
real look at the
Hey,
onset. And another thing that Palmer talked about in this interview with Bloomberg was that, they really met with Jobs Ohio and the governor from the get-go. And, I'm curious how you see the role of a governor, which is obviously the chief salesperson of a state,
yeah.
in terms of communicating this. Just a few days ago with the announcement of XAI, an Elon Musk company investing in Mississippi.
Governor of Mississippi. Yeah.
Yeah, Tay Reeves talks about just we were able to move fast and having that validation from the governor. Is that something that you're seeing play out where that governor is a really critical conduit to winning these
Yeah.
deals?
And we're very sensitive about that, right? Because I've been doing this now for a little while and we have access to a lot of people at high levels. We'll never kind of cash that shit about asking, economic development or secretary of commerce yet to call the governor until we think it's appropriate time, number one. But there are governors who are so closely monitoring this that we're sort of then getting that pressure from them about, hey, we're going to make the call to your client. So, it's going to happen. So we'll try to choreograph that when it does, et cetera. But there are folks out there, the Glenn Youngkins of the world, for example,
Yeah.
who have an insane Rolodex from their own private sector careers. The governor of Indiana, who proactively goes out there and talks about being a concierge. They view themselves as, we're here to provide hospitality to welcome you to our state. Governor Stitt of Oklahoma, if you don't get your permits in 60 days, they're free, right? Like this narrative, this verbiage, this hospitality, right? That's a level of business friendliness and speed that matches what these clients are looking for when they're coming, frankly, from states that have high regulatory environments that are not known for speed, right? If you're coming from New York or California and you're just used to a cumbersome uh, kind of regulatory environment that you don't think government's your friend, and then you have a governor calling you, telling you, "What do you need?" And I'll pick you up at the airport, and the guy who signs the permit's going to be in the car with us. Like that's just mind blowing, right? Like when we do site visits and we try to play tough, and we're like, "Well, who's the person signing the permits?" And they're like, "It's Jeff. He's at the end of the table." The clients are like, what a relief for a client to see that a community is not only eager for them to come, but they're going to make it quick, easy, and efficient for them. So when we do site selection, the way we narrow the sites is through people, power, place, right? Like, is the talent there? Is the power there? It's the biggest risk because of the data centers. And place is the ecosystem, supply chain, is that check. And then when you make the final decision, it's cost, risk, and time, right? Like that's the final kind of, validators to just de-risk it. And then, when the CEO is sitting there with the governor, what's that final kind of nudge, right? Like, so, so yeah, governors play, mayors play. And then now members of Congress and senators are getting more involved because of this federal connectivity. So
Yeah, we reported on how David McCormick is staffing his office for commercial development for this purpose. And just given everything we've been talking about on this call, with Washington playing a bigger role, it makes perfect sense. It's a great strategy, the tripartisan strategy of what
yeah,
Pennsylvania is doing.
yeah, and even bigger news today. His wife, Dina Powell, was just appointed president of Meta. So, Pennsylvania is just leaning in hard on the AI infrastructure, which just makes sense because Pennsylvania is an energy state, like limitless gas, right? Like legacy steel. So for them to be able to lean in and reposition legacy industry to future industry is kind of that repositioning of ecosystem I've been talking about, where they kind of have done that hard work and they were able to kind of play to their strength. Our strength was energy. Okay, well, what needs energy? Data centers aren't about AI, they're about energy. That's what it's about. So if you have lots of energy, you can have data centers, and data centers yield a lot of tax revenue and money.
So we've talked about Pennsylvania. We've jumped around to a bunch of different states that I think have really established the right cadence and momentum around the narrative and the substance of what they need to be doing. As you look at the map, especially here in 2026, what are other states that you have your eye on that are really breaking into the conversation and getting on the radar of the type of clients that every state really wants to land? They're next to Anduril.
Yeah, something interesting I saw last week was Senator Tom Cotton has a bill around this kind of AI conversation, where the bill talks about kind of self-generation opportunities. I don't know if you're tracking this, but it's a really unique piece of legislation where it would allow hyperscalers to have their own power generation.
Yep.
So whether it's kind of nuclear, et cetera. So that would be an interesting kind of trickle-down impact. Would that open the doors for states with lots of lands without lots of population? So does that open the door to, the Wyomings and Montanas of the world that just have a lot of land, to then just kind of set up huge data centers without the power grid even being necessary? So number one, I think just kind of what's going to happen to land in general and power generation, that'll be interesting. Does that then fuel a resurgence in battery storage and technology that kind of dipped after the Biden era? So once you lost the kind of loan program office stuff, the battery technology stuff died out. Does that then have a resurgence because of a need or opportunity with data centers for self-generation? If you have self-generation, you probably need a ton of battery storage because they're not even allowed. They wouldn't, per that bill, they wouldn't even be allowed to be on the grid. They would have to be totally off of it. So from a redundancy risk perspective, that would be interesting. Um, the Southeast just continues to be an opportunity, but there's also an oversupply concern in places like Georgia and South Carolina, where there was this moment post COVID where some communities just overbuilt on industrial real estate that is not heavily powered industrial boxes in really great locations. So some communities in South Carolina thought that it was just going to be Amazon distribution centers post COVID, that that's what's going to be the kind of key business opportunity. So there were some pockets in South Carolina that had, sub 5% vacancy of industrial, and then they overbuilt supply of industrial. So now some of those places have like 13 or 14% vacancy of industrial because that market kind of tanked, and the demand is now for manufacturing, but none of those sites have power. So what happens to some of those assets is going to be a challenge. How do you find power to sites that are just sitting there? But I think figuring out, states that'll understand their ecosystem, continue to offer good incentives, and make it fast for companies and understand what those companies want and who they are, I think will have an advantage. Because nothing's more exciting for a company than when they go to a place and the people welcoming us understand their technology, understand who they are, where they're coming from. You know, that always makes it a little easier than, folks just asking a million questions and they don't understand what eVTOLs are or drones or anything. So
And one of the big, obviously, factors into site selection is workforce. How do you view that? And I know that this is probably a challenge that every state is trying to solve, especially as manufacturing roles evolve, roles that are going to exist a few years from now. We don't even know what they are. What's workforce like from the end as you evaluate where to go? What are companies thinking about? And how do you get that assurance without, putting the first shovel in the ground and building the thing and hoping that they come?
yeah, the best part of this job has been the ability to see some of these technical college in person. I mean, and seeing some of these training centers. So whether it's being in, just outside of Charleston at the Boeing Training Center that's in partnership with a technical college, or, being outside of Huntsville at a technical college. I mean, these communities have really leaned in on their technical colleges. So while a lot of our searches are kind of on the engineers and the 4-year degrees and the PhDs, the workforce and where they get trained really will be through a community and technical college system. So the states and governors that respect, appreciate, and invest in their kind of blue collar technical retraining programs are the ones that are going to succeed, because we are going to have a massive labor shortage if this manufacturing sector resurgence is even close to what I'm hoping, you're hoping, and we're expecting in this country, because we have not been prepared for it. We're nowhere near prepared for it. And the innovation is happening so fast. We don't even have people who are qualified to be plumbers, let alone, rocket scientists. So the numbers are kind of, the disconnect is staggering. So the investments by states are, they need to happen at early childhood education and go beyond. So the folks who come in, and when we come in and have meetings that can articulate the K through 12 program and connectivity to a community college, to the, traditional college, that's where the company gets excited. The ones that come in and they have siloed or independent programs and they're trying to mash together the narrative, it's easy to see through it. The ones that have a seamless kind of connectivity, it's very apparent, right? Because they'll all know each other. They'll have examples of what they've done for GE or for Ford or for Volkswagen or for Boeing. So, you know, getting those reps under their belt is very critical. So,
It's funny you mentioned that early education. When a few months ago we were talking about pharmaceutical manufacturing, and in the state of Ohio, the Ohio Life Sciences Association operates this pathways program that, as young as like second grade in elementary schools, they're going to be starting to get exposure. Not to like the intricacies of life sciences manufacturing, but it's sort of an offshoot of biology. And
yeah.
by the time they get to high school, and you have a factory in your town, you maybe are doing a field trip there. And if you think about those breadcrumbs leading up to the decision about where you go to school, where you start a career, it makes a lot of sense. But it's fascinating to hear that that's something that, as you're evaluating the site selection process, it resonates.
Oh, 100%. What I am a little worried about is the kind of leverage that the utilities have and will continue to have in this process.
Hmm.
A lot of our clients are not data centers, right? They are well capitalized, fast growing, venture backed innovators. And when we go to these meetings, there is sometimes a bit of, I don't want to say arrogance, but um, you know, cases where the utility is experiencing a backlog because of data centers. So the data centers are willing to pay hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars to get their data center up and running, and we're coming with a need for 10 to 50 to 200 megawatts of power, which is a lot of power, but we're not in a position to kind of guarantee or put the outlay that a data center might, be for. So we're always constantly working to kind of, protect and organize that narrative. So I think just understanding, and this is maybe a call to governors and to, municipalities, working with the utility to understand who our clients are and that they're not data centers is an important aspect of this too. Yeah.
When you think about, and this, I'll wrap up in a moment, but
Yeah.
I'm really curious on this about what it takes to attract someone to work at a company. We talked about how these some of the companies are brand new. Maybe people don't really understand what they stand for or who their founder is. Is there a workforce challenge when you're working with a company that's newer or may not even have the clout beyond just the capex total that they're willing to spend with the utility? Like, how do you create the clout and credibility that, say, when Eli Lilly announced this year that they were going to site 4 factories in the U.S., I imagine that created a whole, spiral of states coming to them and people interested in that. How do you kind of overcome like the brand awareness if it's a newer company and we're talking about utilities and workforce as these kind of deciders of success?
Well, my message to the company would be that it's very helpful to have a site selector, whether it's us or Deloitte or a Midwest company or another firm. Like it is helpful, right? Because the site selectors do this for a living. We have the relationship with the economic development folks. You should not be calling economic development folks or trying to do this on your own. So y- that'd be my number one piece of advice is just like you should have some support and some help in an intermediary. Because if you don't, it just shows a level of naivete maybe that you're not understanding how to build true competition and leverage on your behalf, like number 1. Number 2, the financial markets will also look at your process, right? Like if you go to financial institutions when you go to raise capital, if you haven't run like a true process that has a level set competition, the bankers are going to ask you like, okay, well, did you get a maximum incentive process, et cetera, et cetera. So much of this, and you alluded to it, it's storytelling, it's narrative, right? And for me, like hosting Coffee with Ken and having this like podcast and this series, like I just love this stuff, right? And I love politics and I love government. So for me, it's like I get really excited meeting these companies, understanding their journey, the arc of their background, and where they've been and where they're going, and understanding how they fit into the ecosystem of our broader national and industrial policy, and going to the states and helping kind of persuade them why they should be excited and how it would fit, right? So I go to states and try to convince them, why they should care. And I oftentimes try to, tell the states that we're their best friend, right? Like the site selector should be the state's best friend until we're not, right? Until the competition gets too hot, because our goal is to make the decision for the client as hard as possible. We want the state to put the best incentive package possible in front of our clients because we want our client to have a hard decision, right? Like that's the goal of this, right? Like we want the state to do a good job and put a competitive process. We want them to be like, in a good position, right? And then we want our client to have to be like, wow, it's really difficult to decide between Kentucky and Tennessee, right? Like that's what this is all about. And the weight of what we do is look, I spend a lot of time doing office leasing and building sales, and I love it, right? It's great. But there's nothing like working on a project that's going to create 1,000 or 2,000 jobs, Zach. I mean, like literally that changes a community, right? Like, so there is a weightiness to the privilege that we get with these companies to like actually transform a place, right? So, we understand that when we go out, like this is serious stuff, not only because the technology is pretty revolutionary, but because like the places we're going to, like we could probably change them in a really positive way. So it's like super exciting. And, I think that resonates with the economic development leaders as well as with the companies. And with the companies, we want them to sell properly, right? So when we're doing our presentations, we're oftentimes getting so much interest from the states. We have to do a webinar during the RFP process because we get so many questions because we're doing such a good job of like, hyping up the process. So yeah.
You touched on what was going to be my last question about what gets you up in the morning to do this, but when you
Oh,
talk
that's
about
fine.
your excitement and
Yeah.
part of what you do with Coffee with Ken, it certainly comes through and is
Oh, it's fun. Hey, and I'm so excited what you've created, and I think it's perfect timing. I mean, these stories, and you're seeing them with your travels. I mean, you're just scratching the surface, right? It's just, we get out there and I come home, tell my wife, like, we got to see a Trash Pandas game. And she's like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm like, the minor league baseball team in Huntsville, honey. How do you not know that? Right. Like, and some places we go, they brag about the number of minor league baseball teams they have, and it's like, or just sports teams. And in some places you're kind of like, why does that matter? Well, it matters because it shows a density and interest and connectivity to the community. Right. And that is actually a selling point. Because if you're in a place that there's enough people who are excited about being there that it warrants having a minor league hockey team, minor league basketball team, and minor league baseball, that's a strong indicator of that community. You know, if a ton of the retail is empty and they're not building new homes, that community is going to have a challenge. So,
I,
so these
I
are the kind of intangibles that we're helping companies think through when we're doing siting. It's like the qualitative, quantitative aspect. So,
I
yeah,
couldn't agree more. As someone who's been to 49 states, and one of the things I typically do, and I forced my wife into this, and she wasn't happy about it. But in Great Falls, Montana, there's a great the Galaxy. There's a great minor league baseball team, and I think about that community. Now removed almost a decade from
yeah,
visiting. I think about it through the lens of that experience.
yeah. I'm on a mission to hit every coffee shop in America.
I love it. Well, Ken, I'll leave it there unless there's any other
Uh,
messages that you'd
yeah.
like to share.
Now I'm just excited to just be on the road and meet exciting companies and see amazing communities. And the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, is we got to see the Wall Street Journal's 26 most exciting places to see in 2026 in the world, and I think it was like Kuala Lumpur and places in Asia and India and all over the place. In the United States, it was Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, and how exciting, right? So it's just a testament to just like these amazing places around the country that usually for me, I don't know about you,
Yeah.
I used to only go to Chicago and New York and LA and Atlanta. Now it's, Bentonville and, Memphis and Huntsville and Columbia and, Tulsa. So it's great stuff.
It is the great stuff.
Yeah,
Well, Ken, thank you so much for the conversation.
appreciate
This
it.
is the first of many.
You
Onwards
know
to
where to find me.
2026. You got it, man.
Talk to you soon.